Hello there, I'm Nancy Adamson, recording this program from Greensboro, North Carolina, where I gratefully acknowledge living on the ancestral homelands of the Tara, Sapani, Catawba, Occaneechi, Eno, and Shakori Native peoples. Thanks to all of you in the Mount Airy Garden Club for inviting me to share my love of native plants and the wildlife they support. Special thanks to Mary Dana for helping to present this recording since I wasn't sure I'd have good enough Wi-Fi on February 16th, a few days after starting a new job in West Virginia. I'll be highlighting ways we can all support wildlife in our gardens. Since I'll be touching on a lot of topics, I've included links to all the resources I mentioned in the presenter notes, which are available with the slides at the tiny URL shown in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, tinyurl.com/bugs drive the system. Today's program highlights why gardening ecologically is vital, sheds some light on common pollinators, predators, parasitoid insects, and other arthropods that benefit our gardens, and ways you can help support and document wildlife. As gardeners, you are benefiting so many different communities. While bad news is less powerful in motivating people to make more ecological choices than, say, planting gardens, I want to acknowledge how much decline we've seen in wildlife in our lifetimes. The World Wildlife Fund found 68% declines in mammals, fish, birds, reptiles, and amphibians since 1970. All those groups depend on insects directly or indirectly. Wildlife decline is tied to habitat loss and the use of pesticides and fertilizers in our farming, gardening, and landscapes. The good news is that even one pot on your porch without pesticides supports huge numbers of insects, who in turn support the growth of many plants or feed other wildlife. Reducing chemicals in our environment will also help restore health in our own gut microbiomes and reduce so many of our current health problems. What I hope you'll take home from this program today is that enhancing diversity, floral diversity, and structural diversity supports greater insect and other wildlife diversity. It also helps prevent pest outbreaks. Pollinators are vital not just for food, but also healthy air and water. They pollinate about 90% of wild plants. And the way you and your neighborhoods manage your yards and gardens has profound impacts on pollinators and other wildlife. You know more than the most of us. You can help raise awareness of and appreciation for connections between plants, wildlife, and our own well-being. To remind you to recognize how much you know, I like to share a story from a landscape steward in Western Virginia. She taught residents about butterfly gardening. One fall, one of the residents complained that they'd done everything the steward had taught, gotten native host plants, stopped using pesticides, etc., but they hadn't seen any butterflies, only little worms they'd been killing all summer by hand. That resident didn't realize those, quote, worms, unquote, were caterpillars and would transform into butterflies. So please don't take your gardening and your environmental literacy for granted. You have a lot to share. So now we'll jump into a little more about arthropods, which includes bees and other insects, but also spiders, mites, and other invertebrates, animals without backbones. You probably know Maryland's state butterfly, the Baltimore checker spot, which is a rare butterfly since its host plant, white turtlehead, found in wetlands, is no longer common. You can help support the Baltimore checker spots by planting white turtlehead, which, even though it naturally grows in wetlands, does well in average garden soil and in large pots. The adult butterflies need nectar plants, and when I searched for Baltimore checker spots online, I found photos of them on flowers in the aster, parsley, and pea family. So providing diverse flowers in your garden when they are active, which in the Northeast is May through August, you could really help support their populations. Along with butterflies, other important insect pollinators are wasps, bees, flies, moths, and beetles. Hummingbirds are our main non-insect pollinator. Not all butterflies and moths are pollinators, but some clearly evolved as important pollinators for many native plants, like this pipevine swallowtail on Turk's cap lily. Bees are the most important crop pollinators, but we are learning more about the importance of other insect pollinators every day. In other parts of the world, flies and beetles are especially important for some of our favorite foods, like chocolate, macadamia nuts, and soursop fruit. We often talk about using pesticides more safely at night when bees aren't active, but moths are also important for crops and primarily fly at night, unlike the hummingbird moth shown here, which tends to be day flying or crepuscular, flying near dawn or dusk. All these pollinators are vital for native plant pollination, plants that provide clean air and water for us, along with many other benefits. Sometimes when you mention pollinator gardens, two concerns are voiced: potential stings and allergies. You can really help reduce fear in your communities by helping people understand that if you get too close to an insect on flowers, they will fly away. Most bugs and wasps are solitary. Social species like honeybees, bumblebees, and yellow jackets account for less than 20%. Unlike social bees and wasps that live in colonies, solitary bees and wasps mate and then females build and provision nests alone. This means solitary bees and wasps don't have queens, sisters, young, or any long-term provisions to protect at their nest sites. Bees collect pollen and nectar, while wasps paralyze caterpillars, spiders, crickets, and other insects, depending on the species, to put in each nest cell. Each solitary mom lays an egg when she's collected enough food, then she seals off the cell and starts collecting for the next one. So solitary bees and wasps are never defensive. If something happened to that single mom, no one would be around to continue the work she started. Around flowers, even social species are never defensive. They'll fly off if you approach. They're only defensive around their colonies. The exception may be yellow jackets at the end of summer when the colony is at its largest and food is hard to come by. The other commonly expressed fear about pollinator gardens is allergies. Plants that require pollinators don't cause allergies. They have heavy, sticky pollen that must be carried from flower to flower by a pollinator, an animal pollinator, which are commonly bees or some of those others we discussed. You will never see pollen counts for goldenrod in the newspaper, only wind-pollinated plants like ragweed, which flowers at the same time as goldenrod, and oaks, pines, and grasses, which flower at different times of the year, are all wind-pollinated, with very light pollen that is not sticky. Many of our most important crop pollinators are pollen specialists, including okra, squash, and blueberry bees. Other bees may visit those flowers, but these bees eat only pollen from those crops or close relatives. They may collect nectar from other sources. In spring, you may see blueberry bees, for example, visiting redbud flowers. I'll talk about ways you can support pollen specialist bees a little later in the program. There's also a pollen specialist presentation from BugFest 2021 posted at tinyurl.com/specialist bees. Many farmers grow crops that don't require pollinators, such as soybeans and cotton. Nevertheless, cross-pollination provided by pollinators leads to better quality and higher yield in those crops. Maybe more important to farmers is that pollinator habitat is vital for keeping pest populations low by supporting predatory insects like wasps, flies, beetles, bugs, and other natural enemies of crop pests like spiders, mites, and nematodes. So, some people don't realize that agricultural pesticides are actually more regulated than home products. So sometimes the actual pesticide product is more potent in a home product than it is in an agricultural setting. So, my friend Patrick Battle of Living Web Farms encourages people to think of pests as prey. You never want to get rid of all your prey because you need to have some to feed the predators if you want them to be present in your garden. So, just like wolves and rabbits, if you wipe out both populations, those rabbits are going to recover much more quickly than the wolves. And the same goes for wasps and predatory insects. If you use a pesticide that kills all your pests, there's no food for those wasps in that garden any longer. So they'll go elsewhere, and your pest populations are going to be rebound and become more problematic. What do bees and other insects need to thrive? Food, shelter, water, and protection from toxins, just like us. The big difference is that their populations change so much through the growing season. Many adult insects are only active for a couple weeks out of the year, and so you need to provide a diversity of floral and nesting habitat throughout the year. These tools from the Xerces Society have excellent illustrations to help you understand what to look for around your yard, community, or farm. The Yards, Gardens, and Parks Guide has a terrific checklist of actions. So even though this is a little bit small to see, it gives you a good sense of all the info packed into 2 pages. Great ideas for enhancing habitat in any landscape. Another reason your garden work is so important is that plantings, especially of trees and shrubs, help mitigate the negative impacts of more frequent and extreme heat waves. Heat stress affects animals and plants and can affect the availability of nectar and pollen. Pollinator plantings and natural areas have broad benefits for pollinators and for us. Besides providing crucial habitat, they can help link habitat corridors. When flowering shade trees are included, they can help reduce temperatures and energy use for AC that adds heat outside buildings. We want to encourage you to diversify plantings as much as you can. Native plants have a lot of wildlife value that we may not yet fully understand. So using them may have additional benefits for our communities. But herbs, crops, and other non-native plants can also be wonderful for pollinators. We just encourage you to avoid using invasive species, and Maryland has excellent info on invasives. You can just search Invasives Maryland, but I've also included several links in the slide notes. Since I won't be able to go into a lot of detail today, I wanted to highlight some of the other wonderful resources available in Maryland. Maryland Extension and partners are among the most progressive in the country. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service created one of the best guides for native plants and the wildlife they support in the country. It was really the first of its kind, and it's still available for free online. Then you also have a wonderful guide. It's down in the last section by Sam Droege and colleagues on the bees of Maryland. Doug Tallamy and Sarah Stein's books are among the most engaging and compelling for understanding why biodiversity matters to all of us. And then there are bunches of community science and biodiversity programs available in Maryland. When I was the extension horticulturalist in Frederick, Maryland's Maryland's Department of Natural Resources contacted me about removing invasive bush honeysuckle. We had a bunch of bush honeysuckle in the parking lot next to the extension offices, and DNR offered to replace those with some native trees and shrubs. Because they weren't really going to fill in the space, and Maryland has the wonderful Chesapeake Bay Trust program that supports planting native gardens in any public space, we applied to Chesapeake Trust and really enhanced that planting. But not long after I left, I returned to school and I realized the master gardeners didn't really understand the the planting. And so I created 2 slideshows that are still available online. And one is about the reason we did the planting and the method we used, which was putting down cardboard and mulch for site preparation. And then the second one is about the most of the plants in the planting and their wildlife value as well as horticultural values. And the honorarium the garden club is providing will go to add some new native plants to that planting. So thank you so much for your support. And when those plants get put in, I'll let Mary know. And I hope you all will visit there and see your contributions. So friends shared info about another garden in Maryland, in Frederick, that showcases native plants. It's at the Frederick News Post, and they have lots of pollinator plants that include native plants, but also vegetable gardens and a pretty diverse community culturally as well. Seems like a really special place. So I included an article about that in along with the slide notes and slides at the tiny URL. While with the Xerces Society, I helped create another diverse native hedgerow demonstration planting at NCA&T University in Greensboro. So that was on the organic unit of their research farm because installing a meadow can actually be pretty tough, especially if you're using all organic methods. And so installing a diverse native hedgerow is a really nice alternative. You can start with very inexpensive small shrubs and trees and include some perennial herbs and grasses to provide for pollinators. And then over time, as the shrubs and trees grow, you can move some of those perennials to more sunny locations. So there's also a slideshow about establishing that along with some of the lessons learned. And I was so happy to see just after 2 or 3 years this beautiful green tree frog in the planting, a wonderful surprise. And it's in the little inset photo there. While I was with Xerces, I was working as a partner biologist with the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service and promoting wildlife habitat. And so they have tons of support and really excellent information about plantings for pollinators as well. And most of it can now be found via the plants database. And so there's a wonderful slideshow about all the different resources, not just from NRCS. And then there is using the 2014 Farm Bill programs for pollinator conservation. And then they're going to be renewing the Farm Bill in 2024, but I think most of these will still be relevant. So if you have farms, it's a really handy guide to look at before you meet with the staff from NRCS or your Soil and Water Conservation District. Xerces has a bunch of great resources with photos to help with insect and other soil life identification. Habitat Planning for Beneficial Insects is an excellent guide to the main predatory and parasitoid insects with photos and size guides. And then they have a wonderful new Farming with Soil Life that showcases the huge diversity of other agriculturally beneficial life in the soil. These include ground beetles, centipedes, nematodes, and many insects that nest in the ground like ground nesting bees and wasps. So now we'll take a quick look at some of the plants through the growing season that are commercially available and good for wildlife. Remember, the Native Plant Guide from the Chesapeake Bay Office of the Fish and Wildlife Service has all these plants and much more detail about their wildlife connections. Xerces Society also has lots of great pollinator and monarch butterfly info. So some early spring shrubs and trees that are vital for pollinators and natural enemies of pests include these plants here. Pinkster bloom azalea blooms just in time for hummingbirds migrating north and also supports moths like hummingbird moths that we saw a little bit earlier. And the willows are absolutely wonderful for lots of different bees. And if you grow blueberries, you'll probably see this specialist bee, the southeastern blueberry bee, visiting. And it looks a lot like a bumblebee, but if you see a small one with a white face, that's a male southeastern blueberry bee if it's very early in the growing season. A little bit later in the season, there's one that looks very similar that's called an anthophorid bee. So many of these plants provide fruit or other values, the service berries, blueberries, huckleberries, and things like chokeberries are not as tasty to eat directly, but they're used in syrups because of their very high antioxidant value medicinally. And that's kind of an up and coming crop, and I know some farmers, particularly out west, are growing that. So the one plant that is not native in Maryland that I listed is silver bell, but two species of silver bell are found in all the states bordering Maryland. So it's likely that historically it was present, and they're very beautiful and wonderful for pollinators. We have a wonderful diversity of wildflowers, and I expect you're very familiar with these. Many of the flowers and grasses that are good for pollinators and natural enemies of crop pests also make beautiful cut flowers. Some, like violets and strawberries, have edible flowers or fruits. Some, like wild geranium and spring beauty, one of the many woodland species I didn't list, have specialist bees who eat pollen only from those species. Vines are probably our most underutilized native plants in gardens. Friends of mine who are especially interested in butterfly host plants have built walk-through tunnel trellises so they can enjoy a shady walk while looking at the caterpillars eating the host plants, or harvest passion fruit hanging down through the wide trellis openings. If you like hummingbirds, coral honeysuckle, trumpet creeper, and crossvine are fantastic for those birds. I'm sneaking in one more slide on pollen specialist bees because this is a relatively common plant in the landscape that we tend to miss. Most of us think of invasive non-native plants when we think of morning glories, but we have several native morning glories that aren't aggressive at all and aren't really available commercially. The Native American botanist Robin Wall Kimmerer mentions that plants with a lot of common names are generally culturally important. Wild sweet potato was and probably is an important food for Native Americans. Look at those names. Besides wild sweet potato, it's also called manroot, man of the earth, wild potato vine, wild rhubarb. The flowers are only open in the morning, and when I find them, I almost always see either the specialist bee Melitoma toria, shown here in the center. It has unique coloration, making it easy to recognize to species. And then the other bee I often see is another specialist bee, but it's a specialist on squash, the squash bee, but it collects nectar from other flowers. And the one I've seen it on most commonly is the native morning glory. And I have yet to see the specialist on the right, Cimolobus. Many summer flowering shrubs and trees are also excellent for protecting riparian corridors. Those riparian areas, in turn, often provide flowers during times of drought. Sumac seed heads are used to make a vitamin C rich drink like lemonade. Beauty berries make a beautiful, fragrant pink jelly, delicious on a toasted croissant. Shrubby St. John's wort has the same compounds found in the European herb that is typically used in herbal medicine for addressing depression. Blackberries and black raspberries are of course harvested to eat, but also used medicinally, as are rosehips. Black locust has edible, wonderfully fragrant flowers. Just check to see there aren't any tiny sugar ants imbibing before you enjoy a bite. And chinkapin is in the same genus as chestnut, and produces similar, just smaller nuts, just as tasty. Milkweed fluff and milkweed seeds are both marketable. Wild bergamot has the same oil as Earl Grey tea, but I have not yet seen it marketed. Jerusalem artichokes, also called sunchokes, are native sunflowers, and I've seen them for sale for more than $6 a pound at the local co-op grocery store. They're considered, I think, the number one probiotic food that supports our gut microbiomes. I haven't seen our native prickly pear fruit sold, but both the fruits and pads are edible. You can find imported, fresh, and pickled prickly pear at grocery stores. And here you can really see how this butterfly is so suited as a pollinator for the Turk's cap lily. Now we're going to take a little bit of a look at summertime into fall flowers. Late summer into fall blooming flowers are especially important for fall migrating wildlife, such as monarch butterflies and hummingbirds. Many make good cut flowers, and as mentioned, Jerusalem artichokes or sunchokes have edible tubers. Native warm season grasses are host plants for many butterflies and moths, but they are also vital for landscapes that require fire or benefit from fire. And if you would like to learn more about some of our southeastern grasslands, the Southeastern Grasslands Institute has really added a ton of wonderful information to their website. And there's also an excellent book called The Forgotten Grasslands of the Southeast that covers way more than the plants. It has paleontological history and covers, it's really interesting to hear about the animals that have inhabited these landscapes and still do. Annual flowers for cutting like zinnias, coreopsis, and the others shown on this slide. Herbs like dill, cilantro, and then some of our cover crops like buckwheat, sesame, or heat-tolerant leguminous crops like black-eyed peas, cowpeas, and soybeans can all serve as cover crops that benefit pollinating and predatory insects. And they also suppress weeds, keep soil temperatures moderated, and support healthy soil life. So enhancing plant diversity supports greater diversity of pollinators and natural enemies. They in turn improve the quality and size of crops benefiting from insect pollination and reduce pest outbreaks. There are many wonderful plants for pollinators and soil life, so just letting some of your crops flower, like arugula or kale and collards, can really enhance habitat, especially for natural enemies of crop pests, but lots and lots of bees. And here you see a honeybee on arugula and one of our little sweat bees on kale and collards. But whenever I leave those in flowers, I'm really amazed at the diversity of insects that visit them. And then crimson clover is one of the best plants for honeybees, and but also in the spring I just see a ton of ladybird beetles and ladybird larvae, or ladybugs is another name. And here you can see what the pupa looks like. Perennial herbs are wonderful for pollinators and for us. So the same medicinal properties that many of the volatile oils have are good for pollinators, and many honeybee keepers are enhancing plantings around their farms with herbs. So some of our perennial herbs may die back, of course, in extremely cold spells, but things like rosemary, I see them flowering well into December where I am in North Carolina, and sometime even in the middle of winter. And those resources can be extra important again for honeybees in the winter, but a huge diversity of other pollinators and insects. So besides planting or managing for pollinators, consider collecting native seed to propagate, to sell to growers, or share at garden club exchanges such as Scaly Blazing Star, Liatris squarosa, shown here. Be sure only to collect where seed is very abundant and only little tiny amounts from each plant so that natural communities continue to thrive. Leaf mulch and other plant debris in fall harbors many insects including carabid beetles, butterflies, moths, and bees who need a place to overwinter, or they consume the leaves as a food source. And so uh, Bee City USA and Bee Campus USA joined Xerces a few years back, and they just have wonderful programs. And in Maryland, you have many bee campuses and bee cities. I think Westminster is one, and they just do super creative things to raise awareness and celebrate the diversity of critters around us that depend on pollinator plantings. And one of the big ones nowadays is leaving the leaves instead of bagging up all those leaves. Try to find a place to leave some natural debris in your yard to support the diversity of wildlife they support. If weeds aren't invasive, let them flower wherever you can, especially the overwintering weeds. These are excellent, especially for many predatory insects like ladybugs and syrphid flies, and for European honeybees that will come out on a warm winter day and need some flowering plants for nectar and pollen. Other ways you can support pollinators and wildlife, we will just highlight a few. You can provide solitary cavity nesting bee and wasp homes, and that's simply by cutting bamboo, leaving the back closed. It's very important to cut the bamboo when it's green. I have cut big stalks and left them just a day or two, and it's amazing how quickly they will get dry. And you don't want to have any cracking that lets uh, parasitic wasps, like the one in the inset at the top right, um, have easier access to the larvae that are growing inside. So one of the common mistakes, and we can buy some of these houses at garden centers, is that the houses are a little bit too short, and then the opening for the bamboo is a little bit too big. So you really need to, the largest size for the native bees and wasps that we have is really 3/4 of an inch, and that's about as big as a pencil opening. And then the smallest opening could be about the size of the smallest sweat bee you've seen land on your arm. And so even a little smaller than 1/8 of an inch is still fine. But if you do have a pencil size opening, you really want that bamboo to be at least uh, 6 inches long. If not, you change the ratio that the female bee will lay of male to female eggs. And they tend to lay the male eggs at the front of the entrance, and they provide a little bit fewer resources there because there's more likely to be predation. And then also males tend to emerge before the females because they need to go find other nests. They, rather than mating with their sisters when they emerge. So let's see. The other main thing is to make sure you put these nests someplace where you can easily observe them. They're just a lot of fun to see. And there is some concern that providing nests, if they're not well maintained, might negatively affect our native bee or wasp populations. But the benefit they have in terms of helping realize that these are perfectly safe, and especially solitary bees and wasps are the only critters that will nest in these. They will either stay away if you are too close to the nest and not come in or out until you move away, or they'll just ignore you. And it's really, really fun to see them actively provisioning the nest or guarding the nest, like this little predatory wasps in the inset there looking out of its nest. I mentioned earlier that wild geranium has a pollen specialist, and that is a little mining bee. And oftentimes the male mining bees will sleep overnight in the flowers. They don't have nests like the females, and so if you grow wild geranium, take a look, and I wouldn't be surprised if you find some of these little male bees, especially in the late afternoon. And the other bee that you might find around your garden are male squash bees. They will actually sleep in the squash flowers that close up around midday. So this site was created by Jared Fowler in collaboration with Sam Droege, who's at the Beltsville Bee Monitoring Lab, and you may have seen him. He often gives programs throughout the community, and um, they explained how they came up with this 60% figure, that 60% of pollen specialist bees are rare. So this is one area where you could easily help by either planting host plants, and they have lists on this page and also a separate page that has more detailed host plant information. And documenting visits or just providing the plants would be absolutely wonderful. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about documentation in this next slide using iNaturalist, and then the other app is Seek by iNaturalist. And I hope you'll download both of these today and try using them. I, went through about a week. I had to give a program to help people during a virtual naturalist rally during COVID. And I was so pleasantly surprised to discover that after trying to use my phone for about a week to take close-up pictures of bees and other insects, that I had improved tremendously. So it just takes a little patience to learn to zoom in with your phone and then hold still for a minute while it refocuses. And so this community science or citizen science work is tremendously valuable, and it's really helping us understand the relationships between a lot of insects and plants. And so the Seek app was actually designed for young people to encourage them to make as many observations as possible. You get a reward if you take maybe 10 photos of one group of critters. So you can choose to just look at flowers or birds or insects or amphibians. And the neat thing, there's two neat things about Seek, is even if you don't use it to document, you can just use it to see what other people have seen recently in wherever you are. And unlike the iNaturalist app, the Seek app is available offline. So if you're in some remote area, you can take a photo of something, and it's really remarkable how accurate it is in identifying, or at least getting to family or genus. So there's lots of wonderful books on bees, and this little red one, the Upper Midwest Guide from Xerces, is a free PDF online, and it has a beautiful chart of bee families showing their nesting habitats. And I find that is a really helpful tool. Thinking about 400 species of bees in Maryland might seem a little daunting, but starting to understand the families can be really helpful. And Carol and Wilson's books are wonderful. They are great writers. They just came out with The Common Bees of Eastern North America, and both of their books are available in paper or in Kindle. And then Heather Holmes' books, even though she's based in Minnesota, they're totally relevant for our region, and they're packed with incredible photos and plant information as well. So enhancing diversity of plants in your gardens, especially native plants, helps support a greater diversity of insects and other arthropods, who in turn help keep all of us healthy and happy. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you inviting me to speak with you, and I look forward to talking with you shortly.